All
All
right.
right,
Welcome
man.
to the
Here we
Domestic
go.
Draft Podcast. I'm Evan Bierman here with Dan Slowick, our post snowboarding podcast. Dan, it was good to see you this last weekend in Montana. We had a good
hmm
time. But we're back on the grind with the podcast, and I'm curious what you're drinking.
Yeah, Bozeman was great to us. If you're ever looking for a smaller kind of place to go ski or snowboard, we went to Bridger Bowl. It's not part of like the Epic or Icon, so it's a little more like a mom and pop feel. Had a great time. What I'm drinking, not quite of San Diego beer. It's more towards San Francisco actually, but it's called Bianco Wit Beer, and it's by Altamont Beer Works. A little bit about Altamont Beer Works. They are established in 2012 and it's up in Livermore area, which is just inland of San Francisco. And it's kind of, there's a couple wineries out in that area as well. And they're kind of most noted for being the first brewery in that area post prohibition, which is a long time if you think about kind of when breweries started really becoming popular. And you'd think maybe like late 90s, early 2000s. But this one in 2012 being the first brewery in that area since prohibition. But the beer I'm drinking, it's a wit beer. It's pretty easy to drink, nice and simple. It's got a little bit of kind of citrus to it with some orange peel, some slices in there of like coriander seed as well. It's got a 3.5 on Untappd, but I was looking for something nice and light and easy this week, and that's kind of what this is exactly. But if I'm ever up in Livermore, maybe going for some wine, I might check out Altamont Beer Company. What about you? What are you drinking?
Yeah. So I'm a little bit outside of Chicago. I'm at Hoosier Brewing Company. This is in Greenwood, Indiana. Greenwood is actually just outside of Indianapolis. Hoosier was founded back in 2015. They were actually in Shelby County at the time. They relocated to Greenwood in 2019. But the location in Greenwood now is pretty happening. They not only have brews on draft, but they have a full bar, pizza, wings, breadsticks, and they have axe throwing, which is something I feel like we don't see in a lot of breweries.
That sounds
So
safe.
that's pretty cool. They also have a focus on fruited sours that are made using premium ingredients and real fruit puree. I haven't had a fruited sour on this show in probably a year and a half, maybe. It's been a long time since we've done one. But this is really good. It's a fruited sour ale called Roll the Fruit Honeydew with Banana. It's a 4.32 on tap score, which is a really good score, and it's 5.5%. So it's a sour ale brewed with honeydew puree. So
Okay.
like I said, it's been a bit since I've had a fruited sour, and it's also been a bit since we've talked NBA, Dan. So that's why I'm happy that our next guest is joining us today. It's Kris Amundsen. He's the co-founder of Swish Theory. You can find him on Twitter at KLA Hoops. Chris, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys getting me on. I know it was hard to kind of schedule us all together,
Yep.
but I'm here with you in spirit. I've got my root beer. It's a poppy probiotic soda.
There you
It's
go.
about as close as I'll get. But
3.7 untapped.
yeah, I actually lived in Indianapolis for about a year and a half in Speedway, so I know
Oh
Greenwood
wow,
pretty well. Yeah,
nice.
not too
Okay,
far away.
There it is. There's the
that's cool.
connection.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge NBA fan. If you listen to the show, you know kind of my affinity for the Bulls and just following regardless of the state of that team. But I'm curious for you and Swish Theory. We kind of want to know about like the origin story. How did this? Because I'm sure, like us, we have day jobs, but we kind of follow our passions when we can. So how did Swish Theory start, and what all went into creating that?
Man, that's a good question. So it originally started with me and my friend Laro Golden. We were doing a podcast called Bulls 101 for about a year, and then Laro ended up getting hired by SIS Hoops, which is it's a great like data analysis for basketball. So anyways, he got taken away from me,
Hmm.
and I took a couple months off, and eventually wanted to start up a podcast again, and I was looking for a co-host. And if you guys know who Chip Jones is, he does some stuff for Thinking Basketball. He's a really great scout, just a really cool guy. And I'd
Mhm.
reached out to him, and we were starting to plan a podcast to talk about the Bulls because he's a Bulls fan. And then Laro ended up his finishing up his work with SIS Hoops, and so we're gonna add Laro on. And then we brought on two more guys, and then it became this idea where it was kind of around the death of the Stepien, which is a really, really great website with some really deep kind of deep dive analysis into basketball, and it's kind of like the spiritual successor to Grantland that Zach Lowe and Bill Simmons and stuff were on. And so a lot of those guys that had been at the Stepien were hired by teams. And I think there was kind of this dearth of a platform where people who were relatively unknown, but had really, really great basketball knowledge and were really passionate about the game. We kind of started to morph this idea of going just from a Bulls podcast to, why don't we create a platform where all these people can come and showcase their work in one location? And it was something where it wasn't about making money. It wasn't about, building a business or anything. It was just, let's create a platform that's well-known. It has like a well-known brand that's respected, and bring new talent into the NBA Twitter sphere, so people can kind of see their work. And I'm honestly just amazed at how much we've grown. We've got over 30 contributors at Swish Theory now. We've been going for about a year and a half, and it's just been a really rewarding experience. I've been able to write on the site. I've been doing it. I'm still doing my podcast with Laro, Bulls every week, but we've just gotten some really creative people that have showcased their work, and I've just learned so much more about basketball. And that's what I really want, is kind of this basketball sicko. I just want a place to find stuff that's unfiltered, that's just about basketball. It's not about the narrative. It's not about making money or other kind of ulterior agendas. It's just pure basketball. And so that's what we've tried to create. And I think so far I'm really happy with the work we've created and want to continue growing.
Where does go ahead, Dan?
I was just gonna be. I was curious about like the love for data, and I'm curious of it's usually you have like fans, right? They like the players, they like the storylines, or they like their team, their home team. But I feel like it's a whole subset of fans that are just like crazy about data, and following those trends and trying to figure out like new stats to prove that this player X is better than this player because of this certain outlier stat. Is this something that you just like to fixate on, or did somebody put you onto some of these things and you started to kind of just grow a love for that?
What's funny is I would definitely not call myself like a data science guy. Like I'm really, I kind of apply it to music. Like I feel like I have an ear for music and I can memorize songs. Like I would play the piano as a kid and I'd memorize songs, but I couldn't really read music. And so to me, it's like the analytics are like reading the music, but I just kind of have that feel for it. I've always just kind of had an affinity for like trying to understand the game at a deeper level. And so, analytics can really help that. And a lot of data science can help organize things. Now, the data should never be the answer to a question you're asking. It should be something that piques your interest. It should be the start of a question, right? So you say, you have on-off numbers, right? So certain lineups have an effectiveness where they're outscoring their opponents by, 12 points per possession. You're like, well, what does that mean? Why are these players performing in that way? And so that's kind of the start of your question,
right?
Rather than saying, oh, this person is obviously great because they're performing well in this lineup. It's like, well, why? And then that kind of leads you into a deeper analysis of actually looking at film, looking at the schemes that have been set up by the coaches, looking at the player personnel, looking at what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so it kind of it becomes this jumping off point into a greater understanding of basketball. So me, I'm not a data person. I'm not a coach. I just like basketball. And so I can just kind of take this low hanging fruit from these different places and help use that to kind of, facilitate my own analysis into things, and really just to kind of geek out as a fan ultimately at the end of the day.
Yeah. Where did your love for, hoops in general and for the Bulls come from? Did you grow up playing basketball? Were you just Michael Jordan when you were a kid, or, when did this start? And, what do you point to as the inception of your Bulls fandom?
It's been,
Do you have ties to Chicago?
No. So
Okay.
here's the thing. I grew up in Southern California. I still live here.
Big Bulls team.
I grew up watching the Lakers, but nobody in my family, other than my grandmother who lived several hours away, was even a basketball fan. And so I really didn't grow up with a lot of sports other than like watching the Super Bowl, the World Series, or the finals, right? It was kind of like the major events that are on TV. I'd sometimes catch those games, but I really didn't start watching basketball religiously, right, until I was in college. So I went to BYU in Utah, and at the time I was there, Jimmer Fredette was this massively popular scorer. I'm sure you guys know who Jimmer Fredette is.
Oh, yeah.
And And at the time, he ended up getting drafted to the Kings. And I didn't know a lot about the NBA at that point, but I knew enough to know that the Kings were not a great place to go and get drafted. And so he was there for 3.5 years. And at this point, I was about to enter law school. And he got traded to the Bulls midseason. So I started watching Bulls games really to see if Jimmer would end up being anything in the NBA, because he was so much fun to watch in college with all my college buddies. And so it just ended
That's
up
wild.
where Jimmer played almost nothing for the 2 or 3 months he was on the team. But I started to fall in love with the way, like, Joakim Noah, and the way that he was such a non-traditional center, and he was running the offense from, the high post and just passing and being creative. And then, Taj and Kirk and those guys, it was just
Hell yeah.
this unorthodox team that I'm like, this is so different from the Lakers kind of stuff that I'd grown up with. And I really fell in love with that team. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've been a Bulls fan ever since and really dove into basketball. But it wasn't until I was like in my mid-20s where I really dove into it. So I'm still kind of a relatively new fan. And when I tell people I'm a Bulls fan because of Jimmer Fredette, nobody understands why.
I was
I
gonna
didn't
say
hear
you might be
Jordan's
the
name at
only
all. That's crazy.
might be the only Bulls fan. It's like, what's the reason why? Jimmer for that.
Shout out
He was
Jimmer
like
Fredette.
he was like waved like a couple months after he
I
shot
know.
on the team.
Yeah, he's still like a god in China at this point. But
Yeah,
he
the
went
Shanghai
to the
Sharks
Suns,
or
I think,
something
the
like
next year, and then that was it. Yeah.
Wow, that's
So he did
awesome.
pan out, but unfortunately, I'm still here.
I'm curious, man, that's great. Those are not good teams either. But they're fun
No.
teams. They're like gritty teams,
No.
but yeah.
Do you understand? Like, from 2014, this was right after they traded Luol Deng in a
Yeah.
salary dump, basically, and Derrick Rose had torn his meniscus after 10 games into the season.
Yeah,
So
against
that
Portland.
team was not in a good space. And basically,
No.
since then, I've been a Bulls fan. Not many great years of Bulls fandom. I'll say,
Maybe
but I really
one.
just enjoy basketball. I don't know.
So then, okay, not a data scientist, but I'm curious if there is a stat that you prefer when looking to decide, is this player worth my while and watching film, analyzing, because they have this crazy stat number, this crazy kind of outlier that doesn't make sense of why they're good. Is there just some, because I mean, people are making up new stats, and we talk baseball all the time with some of these analytic guys with pitching and hitting and all of these things that are happening. I'm wondering if there's something in basketball that you're kind of gravitating towards or holding on to as like your guiding metric and talent.
Yeah, it's a good question. I try not to attach myself too heavily to one, but I do think EPM, which is, if you go to, it's a website called Dunks and Threes by Taylor Snar, who's working for, he's worked in the league. He's got this kind of catch-all metric called estimated plus minus EPM, and I think I'm a person that really enjoys good defense and great passing, and those are two of the harder things to really nail down in statistical models. And it's easy to see, like, the scorers who fill it up and fill up the box score. It's like those guys are pretty easy to understand if they're really great offensive players or not. But with defense especially, it's really difficult because you can look at things like steals and blocks, but ultimately, like, you can have a guy who doesn't generate any of those and is incredibly good defender because he's always in the right position. He's making good rotations. He's calling out in communication on defense. So it's hard to kind of connect those dots with numbers and metrics. But I do think EPM does a pretty good job of estimating overall impact on defense. And as I said, it kind of helps start the conversation of, why is this guy like 99th percentile this year? He's not a good defender. Like, is it because of where he's being placed in the scheme? Has he improved in certain areas? So that would probably be the one stat that I look to as kind of a jumping off point in my analysis.
Interesting.
So Swish Theory does like draft prospects and mock drafts and things like that. Is that a statistic that you look to when making any kind of decisions as far as draft prospects? Is that even a statistic you feel just as worthwhile for a college player as it is for an NBA player, given the players that they're playing with, that kind of thing, caliber of the players?
So it's interesting. I think a lot of those types of stats aren't as readily available for college athletes, and it's a little more difficult. And so who we have at Swish Theory, I mean, Chip Jones kind of heads up the draft process and that scouting process, and it really is a grind. It's really a lot of watching film of a lot of different college games, and to me, it's like the college game is not as interesting as the NBA for me, for various reasons, but mostly it's because I just don't have time to watch all these sorts of teams.
Yeah.
But there's, we got a dozen guys or so that just focus on the draft, and they're so phenomenal at it. And it's a lot of watching film. It's a lot of, um, a lot of people, like for me, I don't really care about hip flexibility. Like when I'm watching the NBA, I don't think about that, but draft people do. They're always like, "Oh, he's got really flexible hips. Like he can change directions really easily, and it helps inform his
Didn't that kid
defense."
at Duke like get his hips shaved down so he could be more flexible? Did you see that?
I didn't see that, but that does not surprise me.
Yeah, it was like the Duke center this year, like in the offseason, got his hips shaved down.
That sounds
It sounds
painful.
so painful, but I'm
Yeah.
sorry to kind of just sidetrack you there, but
Oh, it's fine.
yeah,
That explains why he did it then, I guess.
yeah. I was
mean,
like, he's being scout.
yeah.
He's got stiff hips, so he needs to loosen them up a little bit. And this is the kind of thing you guys are looking at.
Yeah, it's funny because NBA teams are always looking for an edge because it's a zero-sum league, right? It's if you don't pick up this player, another team's going to pick him up. And it's like every time you watch the Miami Heat, for example, they've always got some guy they took off the scrap heap and made into like a playoff rotation player. And so teams are always looking for these edges. And I think a lot of our draft guys are looking into, these biometrics of players. And there's other places, like there's I can't remember the name. It's like P3 or something in Santa Barbara where they do measurements of different athleticism. It's like a kind of like a combine type thing, but they use it to help players identify areas of improvement in their biometrics, and they're able to use that to kind of improve their game, which I think it's really brilliant. So I don't know about shaving, pieces of your hip off, but I will say that college players are competitive, and I think they have access to a lot more tools than they used to in order to really develop their game. And, NBA teams are always looking for that. So they're always looking at these draft boards and these draft guys and trying to find diamonds in the rough, who are also trying to find diamonds in the rough. So it's a really competitive market for that. And I think, we put out our first draft guide last year, and if you search draft guide, NBA draft guide on the internet, ours was the second hit
Nice.
on Google, which we didn't pay for, we didn't pay for any SEO or anything like that. It was right under the ringer. So I just thought the quality of our work was really impressive. Now I don't contribute to it, so I can't take credit for it. But I was really proud of the work that Chip and those guys put in, because it's really incredible stuff.
That's great. Yeah,
Wow.
his name is Kyle Filipowski. He's the center at Duke that had it.
Oh yeah.
But with all that, like, and y'all like kind of being really accurate on the scouting and the mock drafts, do you have NBA teams reaching out to Swish Theory and just kind of maybe asking to pick your brain on some things, or seeing if they could snag one of you guys away and have you work for them?
We've definitely had some of our contributors be contacted and interviewed by NBA teams to potentially, seek employment there. I've also worked with some kind of affiliates on potential projects down the road. Some of those, I mean, none of them are official, so I wouldn't be able to like speculate into that too much. But I will say, I think teams are paying attention to the work of our contributors, which is really, I mean, it's a kind of a dream come true for me, who's really still very new in basketball. But absolutely, I think with the advent of the internet and the availability of these stats online and so much film, you get guys from all over the place that just love basketball, and it's easier to find really good talent. And so if Swish Theory can serve as a platform to, be like a megaphone for that talent, like, then I've done my job correctly. And it's been a project worth creating.
That's great.
So do you have any plans that you can share with us about, what's in the near future for Swish Theory?
Man, I would love to have it grow into a kind of a business aspect. Like I want to keep the platform the way it is, and not have contributors be required to present certain things or do certain subjects. I want to keep it open for them to really have just creative license to do whatever they want, as long as it's good, then they can post it. But I do think that Swish Theory, because of all the work that we're doing, especially in the draft, there's so much of a database of information that we're able to gather that I think could be useful for certain NBA teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can harness that information into something that's easily accessible, I think that would be a really useful tool, not only for teams, but also for athletes who are looking to improve their game. If they could access a database of their film at any time and have people that really know ball break down that stuff
Right.
and explain it to them, that's going to help their career launch from where it is as well. So that's something that I would love to do in the near future. And we've definitely had conversations in that kind of vein.
Interesting. Speaking of an NBA team, let's go ahead. I know we'll get you out here in like 5 minutes, but let's talk about the Bulls really fast. It's our team. We're all fans of this team. In my opinion, played one of the most entertaining games of the season last night against the Suns. Kind of went down to the wire there. Interesting that, you know, Zach was out and they're kind of playing this more, in my opinion, you know, team basketball, sharing it, running the actual offense. Was in that first half particular is what everyone wants to point out of how great they were playing. Was there anything you saw, or if you watched the game, or something about that style of play when certain players are out, that the Bulls do well with? Is there something that they do differently?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. Number one, when you have a guy like Zach LaVine who's such a dynamic scorer, teams game plan for players like that. And so when those guys are out, especially if they're out unexpectedly, it's a lot harder for a team to game plan against multiple scorers. Like they don't know who's going to be filling up the stat sheet that night. And obviously Kobe White has had quite an ascendance this year with Zach being out. And I think he's been a really creative playmaker and just an all-around confident scorer. And it's something that we've seen flashes of, but he's really just expanded his game. If you look at his handle and what he's doing off the dribble, it's night and day from earlier in when he was younger in the league. He's always had kind of this north-south speed and quickness to him. He's always been a pretty good shooter, but he's working with Peter Patton this year, who's their shooting coach that they just hired, which, hey, why didn't we do this like 10 years ago? But he's really done great work of helping Kobe understand the mechanics behind why he shoots the way he does and helping tweak little things. And then just the handle that Kobe has worked on, he's been able to utilize his handle because it's tighter now because he can put that ball on a string. Now he can use that change of speed and direction to his advantage to create opportunities for his teammates. And so you saw that in the first half of that Suns game. The ball was popping, it was moving, and because you don't have a guy like LaVine and DeMar, who I think separately can play that style really well, but together often seem to suck the oxygen out of the room on offense.
Yeah.
And Vooch has always been a pretty good passer from the middle. And so you got those guys just really humming and they're making shots. They were moving down the court. They were getting out in transition. I mean, it's the basketball that you want to see as a fan, right? It's exciting. It's dynamic. It's not his turn, right? So I think that Zach can absolutely play that style. When he came back, he has had flashes of playing that style, being more of a playmaker. But I think the team is in a situation where they really can't have all three of those guys on the roster at the same time. It clearly hasn't worked without a connector who is as genius as Lonzo Ball was.
Yeah.
Lonzo Ball really made it fit all together and put everyone in their kind of proper role. But since he's been out, as you've seen, it's just been pretty disjointed. So yeah, it's there's a lot, but I loved that first half. Obviously, it was a tough second half and the ball kind of stopped moving as much. But if we can kind of harness that energy in the first half, I think we could have a lot more fun as fans this season.
Yeah.
Is Kobe White future all-star potential player to build around? I feel like you've seen more out of him this year than I've seen out of Patrick Williams ever to give me any confidence that he's a long-term piece. But what are your thoughts on Patrick Williams? That's somebody Dan and I have gone back and forth on since he's been in the league, that, you know, time's running out for his potential.
My question is he a bad NBA player?
No, I'll be honest with you. It's going to be hard for you guys to find a bigger Patrick Williams defender than me. I think a lot of what he does, and I think Wendell Carter had kind of the same problem. A lot of what he does is really not flashy. It's very fundamentally sound, but it doesn't pop off the screen. Whereas you had a guy like Daniel Gafford who was always racking up these huge blocks and dunks, right? And so he was to a fan, it's like he's always doing something. You always notice he's out there. Whereas with Patrick, his defense has actually been quietly really, really, really solid. He's a very good defender. He's gotten way better at positioning, especially as a low man in help position. He's a great kind of secondary rim protector. The offense has come around. He's a great shooter, but his shot's a little slow.
Ball handling.
Yeah, the ball handling he needs to work on. It's clear, but we've seen him where he just kind of when he keeps it simple and he does this little like kind of short crossover or just kind of 1 or 2 steps. He gets to his pull up. He's a good shooter. He's confident. It's just a matter of, I think, number one, he just hasn't had enough reps. And as you mentioned, Evan, time is kind of running out for him to really develop that. And where the team's trajectory has been, it's been difficult to kind of get that going. But I absolutely think, to your question, Dan, I do think he's a good NBA player. I think he has, just because he can defend and shoot threes at a high clip or at a high efficiency, that's a valuable player. He's like 6'7", 6'8", big dude, can do a lot of different things. Now, he clearly has a lot of room to grow. But yeah, I do think that he's a player that the Bulls can build with long term. And then to Kobe, I think if he continues to play like this, I think he would be in an all-star conversation if he played like that throughout the season. He's really improved a lot, but is he a lead creator that's creative enough to really run your offense all the time? I'm not convinced yet. I still think we need someone with a higher kind of aptitude for passing and creation.
Yeah. Yeah, I still view Kobe kind of as a scoring guard, although he's been great this year with the pick and roll and slowing things down. That's like the biggest change I've seen is he's really able to throttle down in the lane and like be comfortable, controlled in the lane, and let the defense react first and decide later. Only a few more minutes left, maybe a minute left. Any trades going to happen? Any pieces on this team getting traded? We're seeing leaks that Levine's now untradeable. People around the league don't like his contract, and some of the newer CBA clauses are affecting that as well. But are some players going to be on the move here?
I mean, I'd like to think so. Since Acme came here, since the Vooch trade, they really haven't made any significant move in the last couple of seasons. So it's hard to say. The track record doesn't speak very highly of their willingness to trade. But I do think the team is absolutely in need of some change. I think they should move more towards Kobe and Pat's and Dalen and Io's timeline of events. DeMar's been great, but it's, how much is that veteran leadership worth? I would love to have him back, but it's about price. And as you know, the Reinsdorfs care a lot about the money.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I anticipate that a lot of teams will call about Alex Caruso. And if the Bulls are serious about winning, they need to make some real changes. They do. So I hope so. Short answer.
I appreciate it. All right. Again, thanks again, Kris, for being here. He's Kris Amundsen. He's the co-founder of Swish Theory. You can find him on Twitter at KLA Hoops. Also, go ahead and look at Swish Theory on Twitter as well. Give him a follow. It's a must for any basketball fan.
Thanks a lot, Kris.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for being here.
All right. Thanks again to our guest, Kris Amundsen. He's the co-founder of Swish Theory, and you can find him on Twitter at KLA Hoops. All right, Dan, we talked a little basketball, but the NFL playoffs are going on right now. I need to know your thoughts. We watched some of those games this weekend when we were together snowboarding. I just want to know, what's your opinion now looking at this next round?
Well, thoughts on the last round. Can't believe Detroit is going for it. One more win, and they're in the Super Bowl. I thought the 49ers Packers, was much closer than a lot of people thought. And I don't know if that doesn't bode too well for the 49ers if the Packers, the youngest team in the NFL, are able to pretty much have that game, if not a missed field goal, go down to the wire. CJ Stroud definitely looked like a rookie on the road in Baltimore, which is probably a real tough matchup. And then you had the Chiefs Bills, which I was on the plane flying, so I didn't really get to watch it, but from what I heard was one of the all-timers. That rivalry keeps getting better and better in the playoffs, I think.
So we all felt kind of robbed, I think, watching that one when Bass
field
missed
goal
that field
again,
goal
right?
to tie it.
Yeah. Yep.
And
so
it was a great game.
We got Chiefs, Ravens, Lions, 49ers, and the winners go to the Super Bowl. I think a couple of these teams, if you said that, to go to the Super Bowl, you Chiefs, Ravens, 49ers, probably, most people in the NFL said, yeah, I can believe that. Those teams are pretty good. Historically, in recent history, at least, they've been dominant. But the Lions are one win away from going to the Super Bowl is insane. And I'm sure you could probably go to some episodes at the beginning of the football season when we were going through predictions of the Bears' wins and losses. And we got to Detroit and we said, the Lions are going to lion. The Detroit Lions are who they are. The Bears are probably going to win that game. Nope. Lions are not lying. They are one win away from the Super Bowl. You got predictions?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the Lions are the team everybody's rooting for. I got to go with the 49ers in that game. I think they're just going to match up better against the Lions. They still got everybody, especially if Bo comes back. I think Debo left that game,
Yeah, shoulder.
but if he's out, it's a little bit of a different ball game there. We've seen some really bad games from Brock Purdy, when he's played some good competition. So I think that one's up in the air, but I would take the 49ers. And then on the other side, I'm not ruling out Patrick Mahomes. I think, it's been a rough season for him, but look he's still where he is. They're still in the championship game. I think he's been here every year. Is that
wild?
right?
Something
I think
like
that was the crazy stat. And maybe that's a fast fact for you today. I think he's been in the championship game every single, year that he's been a starter. I'm not ruling him out. I think the Ravens' run is going to end there. What about you?
I think I want to go Detroit against the 49ers, especially even if Debo plays. I mean, that shoulder is what held him out a couple weeks in the season, hurt it, re-aggravated again a week ago. So he's not going to be the Debo that I think everyone relies on. The weather is going to be fine, and Detroit's a dome team, so I don't think weather is going to play a factor at all, which I think bodes well for the away team. And yeah, Brock Purdy isn't great, and Detroit's defense and their defensive line, Aiden Hutchinson, is only getting better. So I have no problem going with the Detroit Lions, and I think out of all four teams, it's the fun team to root for, right? Because they are the underdog, the Cinderella story, if you will. And then the other side, I want the Ravens, just because
Too
I
much
could
Chiefs.
not stand watching the Chiefs go to the Super Bowl again, and also with Taylor Swift being there and the circus that would be. But I think if people were doing the logo colors for the Super Bowl, has been like the last couple matchups. You could look at like the two colors that are in the Super Bowl logo, and this year their colors were red and purple. So if you're going that route, it would be the Ravens and the 49ers.
Interesting. That's like something that's been
Someone on
studied.
Twitter, so yeah, someone on
Okay.
Twitter found like the last 5 Super Bowls and their logos, and the two teams in the Super Bowl, their colors were, I don't know if they're the primary, secondary, but at least they were part of it, which was pretty interesting to see.
All right. Well, I'll get you with another quick fast fact here, Dan. We talked a little bit about Kobe White, how good he's been this year. What what's your guess at his points per game last year and his points per game this year?
Points per game, Kobe White last year, some reason I want to say like 16.8, and this year he's probably like at like a 23-1.
So he's at 9.7 last year and he's at
Oh,
18.8 this year.
yeah.
So,
Okay.
doubled what his production was because he's getting the minutes. He's only getting 23 minutes last year, and now he's getting 36 almost. So, a little bit more opportunity. And you'd love to see that from the Bulls, a team that, gets to this point with players like this in their fourth, fifth season. And they think, okay, there's nothing left. Let's trade them. And then they're good somewhere else. I'm glad that Kobe White is one that it seems like they're holding on to for a bit. And then the other piece of this, Dan, I want to know what your thoughts are on his draft comp from back when he was drafted. The player that he was compared to, his like comp, was Gilbert Arenas. You see
Huh.
that at all in Kobe White?
Agent Zero.
Yeah,
Gilbert Arenas was really good.
yeah.
I feel, and I think Kobe's a little more athletic than Gil was, but Gil, his shot was really good and he was really crafty. I like it. I think that's an interesting comp. That's a good fact there.
Coming
Good
back to
point.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
Five years later, just looking at it. Okay, not a bad comp. But that's been our show today. Thanks again to our guest, Kris Amundsen of Swish Theory, for joining us. For Dan Slowick, I'm Evan Bierman. You've been listening to the Domestic Draft Podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate the show. You can find us on Twitter at Domestic Draft, on Instagram at Domestic Draft Podcast. Our website is domesticdraft.com, and you can watch the show on YouTube and search up Domestic Draft and drop us a sub. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.